presentation on relapse prevention, awareness, and activities. I am your host, Dr. Donnelly Snipes, and this is one of my very favorite topics. I really like talking about relapse prevention. And remember, relapse means a return to a prior state of being. So we relapse in terms of um, mental health disorders, we relapse in terms of attitude, we can relapse in terms of addiction. So we're a lot of times when I use the word relapse, people automatically think addiction, but relapse can apply to just about anything. So we're going to define relapse, identify relapse warning signs, and identify strengths that can help people prevent relapse. And we'll talk about some fun ways to help people learn these in individual or group therapy. As I said, relapse is the return to something that has previously been stopped. If you were a messy person and you started being very tidy, and then all of a sudden you just kind of let it all go, that's a relapse. That's a relapse in that habit. So we want to really think of relapse broadly. Relapse is multidimensional too. Just like motivation is multidimensional, relapse is multidimensional, basically for the same sort of reasons. Emotional relapse is when we start feeling irritable about what's going on. We start resenting this new behavior that we're doing, or we start feeling um, like we're missing out on something. Mental relapse is when our thinking changes and we start justifying, denying, blaming, making excuses, anything like that. Physical relapse is, as it sounds, when we start doing things physically that are akin to what we stopped doing before. And social relapse is when we go back to interacting with other people in a way that represents our old way of being. And I'm going to use depression and addiction as our main examples today, just because those are really prominent. So let's talk real briefly about addiction relapse in these, just because that's the one everybody thinks of first. Emotional relapse in addiction, people start feeling frustrated and like they're not getting what they want, like they are missing out on something. Mental relapse goes back to that stinking thinking, the negativity, the expecting the worst, minimization, rationalization, denial. Physical relapse is when people stop taking care of themselves. It's not just going back to using, but it's going back to doing those things that make them more vulnerable to distress, which makes them more vulnerable to use. So, physical relapse is going back to those old behaviors like not eating well, not getting enough sleep, and obviously using substances. And social relapse is returning to those interactive behaviors with others where you're guarded, whether you're lying, where you're manipulating to get people to do what you want to do. In depression, let's just kind of switch gears here. Emotional relapse is when you start feeling depressed again. Okay, hey, that's a shocker there. Mental relapse is when you start thinking in those through that depressive lens. You start seeing things as hopeless and helpless. You start telling yourself that you are useless and worthless. So your thoughts regress to those thoughts that support a, a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. Physical relapse in depression is very similar to physical relapse in addiction. It's when you stop doing those things that you need to do to help maintain your neurotransmitters and the health of your body to support your mood. That can be stopping taking your medication, not getting enough sleep, not eating well, but it also can be sleeping too much. So there are a lot of things. We want to look back and we want to say, how, when you were symptomatic, what were you like emotionally, mentally, physically, and socially? What were those relationships like? When you are working on your recovery, not necessarily that you've gotten there, because sometimes it's always a work in progress. A lot of times it's always a work in progress. But when you are in that good place for you, what is different emotionally, mentally, physically, and socially? How do you feel? We want to have people create a distress versus happiness worksheet. And this is one that I generally have people do um, when they are, between sessions. If it's a group session, that's fine. This is a homework assignment. They bring it back to the next group. But they basically do what I just said. I want them on a sheet of paper to identify what they're like emotionally when they're experiencing distress or they're experiencing symptoms, and what they're like emotionally when they are experiencing happiness. A lot of people, for example, when they are happy or when they're in a good place or when they're in a recovery state, whatever you want to call it, emotionally, they're not just happy, they're also curious. They're also excitable. There are other emotions that happen that when people are not symptomatic. Remember that a relapse is when people start returning to any of the people, places, things, behaviors, or feeling states that are characteristic of the problem. And I'm going to just generally call it the problem today because it can be so many different things. In emotional relapse, emotions and behaviors become negative and unpleasant. People may find it difficult to start experiencing pleasure, just nothing does it for them. So we're noticing, and think about different clients that you've had, or maybe even yourself. It doesn't necessarily start with emotional or physical or social. Relapses can start in any of those different areas, and they generally kind of reverberate out and bring the other areas down with them. Likewise, recovery can start in one area and it reverberates out and can bring the other areas up. And that's what I want people to see, is to recognize that they need to be alert to all of these different dimensions in order to catch relapse early and in order to identify all the different tools they have to help them maintain recovery. It's important for people to identify what triggers their negative emotions, such as anger, resentment, jealousy, guilt, anxiety, fear, stress, and depression. Now, you notice anger, resentment, jealousy, and guilt are all kind of smushed together with slashes. That's because they're all variations on the emotion anger. Resentment is anger at somebody else for something they should have done. Jealousy is anger at somebody else for having something that you want. Guilt is anger at yourself for something that you should have done. So it's anger. I'm kind of putting it in there. Anxiety, fear, and stress are all kind of different flavors, if you will, of fear. So I kind of smush those together. When people say that they are terrified, obviously that's on one end of the spectrum. When they say they are stressed out, that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And I tend to conceptualize anxiety as somewhere in the middle, but it's a continuum. And then depression. Some people say that depression could go in that anger area. I would argue it could go in anger or anxiety, but it could also be its own thing. Because when we are stressed out for too long, like we talked about on Tuesday, our body can go into a conservation state, so, which is hypocortisolism, which causes us to have less fight or flight activity because our brain doesn't want to become excitotoxic. Okay, that's cool. But unfortunately, when that happens, we tend to feel very, at the very least, Eeyore-ish. And, poor Eeyore gets such a bad rap, at least in my classes, because, nothing ever seemed to make him super happy. Nothing seemed to make him super depressed. He was just kind of there. He was just kind of blah a lot of the time. And, that's something that we can see in people who are anxious for too long. When people are anxious or angry for too long, remember, those are both sides of fight or flee. Those are both indications that the body is experiencing a threat. The brain thinks that there's a threat. Well, when that threat persists for too long, eventually people are going to start feeling hopeless and helpless. Now, I put depression in its own little category because depression can also mean we lose something that is important to us, and that helps us know what's important to us. But it's important for people to know what triggers their three main categories of dysphoric emotions: things and the media, people, places, and events. And you know that I am fond of having flip chart paper around the room in the four corners. And that's what I generally do here. And I have people identify on the flip charts the things, or the media issues that trigger their anger, resentment, and jealousy. And the people in their life, and they don't have to name particular people. They can say my cousin, or whatever, or talk about different characteristics of relationships that trigger their anger, and they go around and do that for the anger cluster. And then we can go around and do it for the anxiety cluster, and then the depression cluster. After each cluster, I have everybody sit down and we talk about the similarities between what triggers anger for the different people in the group, so people can recognize that, what, this a lot of people feel this way. It kind of normalizes their reaction. Then we talk about, okay, what do you do with it? We also talk about how anger, resentment, and jealousy, or some of these dysphoric emotions, we talk about how the dysphoric emotion can trigger or precipitate a relapse of the original problem, whether it's addiction or depression, or, some sort of mood issue, and help them see why it's important to be aware of the things that trigger these emotions so they can mitigate them. They can eliminate as many potential sources of distress as possible. Negative emotions or unpleasant emotions make us uncomfortable. It's important to help people remember that they need to stop, and that's the hardest part, stopping, identifying the emotion, explore why they're feeling that way, and then take steps to fix the problem. And there are a lot of things people can do to fix the problem, which is why I talk a lot about psychological flexibility, reminding them that, feelings are natural. Feelings are our body's response based on our prior learning. When we have a feeling, just like when the smoke alarm goes off in the um, in your house, when we have a feeling or the smoke alarm goes off, it tells us that there might, emphasis on might, be a problem. So we need to identify how we're feeling, explore why that we're feeling that way, and if there's really a threat. And if there is, figure out what we need to do. We can address the problem. We can address how we react to the problem. We can choose not to do anything. Inaction is also a viable choice. Or we can really just stew on it and feed that emotion. So those are kind of your four options. And I encourage people to look at what their options are and choose which reaction is most helpful in that particular moment. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, it may make you angry for a minute. And then you can explore that you're feeling angry, and realize, you know what? There's nothing I can do about this. And chasing after the person's probably just going to make the thing a lot worse. So, what can I do to fix the problem? In that particular case, a lot of times the recommendation is to let it go. When we're talking about, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, unfortunately, politically, in the media, yada, yada. And it's making it's triggering a lot of anger and feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and anxiety, and pretty much any dysphoric emotion you can name, it's triggering for somebody right now. Okay. So identifying that emotion, recognizing how they're feeling right now, exploring why they're feeling that way, and then taking steps to address the problem in a way that's meaningful for them. And, that could mean staying home, for example. My children right now are not supposed to go out after dark just because there has been some um, uh, less than peaceful gatherings in our proximity, not in our town yet, thankfully. But one of the rules that my husband set, so we feel less anxious, is that they are not going to go out after dark. During the day, there doesn't seem to be any problems in our area, in Nashville and the suburbs, so we haven't worried about that as much. But that was our response. We recognized that we were stressed about their safety, and we took steps that were most meaningful. We're obviously not going to try to lock them down. They've already been locked down long enough. Um, it's important to help people remember that they can become stuck in emotions sometimes. They can get stuck nurturing an emotion and blowing it out of proportion, thinking about, if this happens, or because this happened, what this means, and just stewing on it and burning up a lot of energy. And I've used this analogy before. It's like getting your car stuck in the mud and sitting there and just pushing the gas and pushing the gas and going, I'm stuck. And so I'm going to give it some more fuel. And you just get more stuck deeper in that mud. Um, you can become stuck in emotions, compounding it with other emotions like anger and guilt. If you feel depressed, for example, then you may also feel angry at other people for not understanding. You may feel angry at yourself, at your body, for not, shaking it off, or for having another depressive episode. You may feel guilty because you feel depressed and you don't have the energy to get up and go to your kid's soccer game or whatever. And it's important to remember and recognize the totality of the emotions, because the more secondary emotions you pile on, the more you've got to claw out of before you can see the light of happiness. People can get stuck in emotions when they personalize what's going on. If they feel angry, for example, they can personalize it and think, all of these people are trying to make me angry. They don't have any respect for me. And in reality, you know, a lot of people are so egocentric that they're really not thinking about their impact on you. Um, and people can get stuck in emotions trying to escape from it instead of accepting it is what it is right now. They try to escape from it. And as soon as they quit running, as soon as they take a breath from trying to escape, that emotion is still there. And it's important to help them figure out how they're going to deal with it. There is definitely something to be said for radical acceptance and distress tolerance skills, but those are to be used to help people to get into their wise mind so they can figure out what to do to respond. Remember, on Tuesday, we talked about the fact that when people's HPA axis is activated, when their threat response system is in overdrive, there are a lot of things going on. They have high levels of glutamate and norepinephrine. That norepinephrine can cause tunnel vision. So we want to help them get back into their wise mind, turn down that HPA axis so they have less norepinephrine imbalance and they can think more logically about what some of their options are. So instead of, you know, feeling like they're stuck and trying to escape from it and staying completely revved up, they can get into their wise mind. Again, remember that emotions are just cues like a stoplight. They are telling you, you know, stop, go, caution, but it's up to you to check and make sure what's going on. Negative emotions are how people feel in the moment. And I don't want my clients in recovery, I don't want anybody to ever think that they should be happy all the time, every day. That's unrealistic. I don't know a single person who is happy all the time, every day. I think there are even, you know, examples of people who you might think of, they probably have bad moments. And it's important to recognize that that is an okay reaction. You know, we want to have sort of a range of emotions, and people have the ability to choose to change or improve the next moment. One of the things I like to do with um, people after we go through the um, emotional triggers, the distress triggers activity that we talked about on the last slide, we talk about what can you do to change or improve the next moment when that happens. I want them to walk out of group that day having 2 or 3 ideas of different ways they may react instead of holding on to nurturing or getting stuck in that emotion. To prevent emotional relapse, people need to practice mindfulness. A lot of times, you know, sometimes you just get sucker punched and all of a sudden you are feeling really angry. Okay, you know, you couldn't have seen that one coming. But a lot of times there's a gradual decline in our mood. People go from feeling, you know, great to okay to kind of flat, and it just works down from there. It's important for people to uh, recognize how they feel emotionally each day and what's prompting that. Um, it's important for them to increase positive experiences by doing things that are enjoyable, go figure, not just getting up, going to work, coming home, going to sleep, and repeating. That's not going to increase those positive experiences. On Tuesday, we talked about the bath water, how our stress chemicals are like hot water and our calming chemicals are like cold water. Well, when we do positive experiences, we're increasing that cold water. We're helping keep the bath water tepid instead of getting too hot. Um, and people can also use guided imagery. You don't have to, you know, get out and do stuff all the time. Now, it's important to do things. You know, you can't use guided imagery for your only source of positive experiences, but guided imagery can be really helpful to help people get to a place where they're in their wise mind. Remember how, I think it was a couple of classes ago, we talked about using guided imagery in order to help people um, tampen down that stress reaction. If they can go to their, and I don't know what else to call it, I call it their happy place. Um, and just think about that for a few minutes and quit stewing on whatever is, you know, stressing them out at the moment. If they can get a second, then when they return to address that issue, they are often in a clearer frame of mind. Have people keep a gratitude journal. A lot of times we remember what happened most proximally or what happened most intensely. So if you get into a fight with somebody, you know, you may be thinking that, oh, this relationship is always so stressful and this person is always getting on my nerves. Hear the always cognitive distortion in there. A gratitude journal, you can look through and you can recognize that, you know what? All right, maybe we're in a fight right now, but overall, this relationship is good. A lot of people right now are feeling very stifled and very frustrated, and instead of focusing on what they do have, what they're grateful for, they're focusing on what they don't have. A gratitude journal helps people, refocus. And I've talked before in other classes about creating a gratitude tree. And you can either do it with post it notes on a wall and have each post it note kind of represent leaves of a tree. If you have a classroom or a wall that you can do that on, my particular favorite way is to get a vase and get some sticks from outside, long 3, 4 4 foot sticks, something like that, in a big vase, and then get present tags, the ones that have the string and the little paper on them that you can write things on, and have people write down what they're grateful for on those tags, one thing they're grateful for every day. And if you do this as a family, it can be really cool because you can all of a sudden see that gratitude tree filling out. You can also do it if you're doing group therapy. I used to do it a lot in residential because we had 80 some odd people in house. So that tree got pretty full pretty quickly. And it helped people recognize, and they would read what other people were grateful for and go, hey, that's something I'm grateful for too. Gratitude journals can really help us refocus and recognize accepting the good with the bad instead of focusing exclusively on the negative. Encourage people to check whether they're personalizing something that may not be about them. Um, I was talking to a person today who was really stressed because he had sent a text out to, office mates about something and nobody responded. Nobody liked it. And this idea that people need to like things is something new to this generation. We didn't have Facebook and stuff when I was younger, so Instagram and those sorts of things just aren't something that I'm quite used to. But it's very powerful when you send a message out to a group of coworkers and not a single person responds. And this person felt very insulted that nobody liked his post that he sent out. And so we talked a lot today about what are some other reasons they may not have responded to that. And, that could have happened, and trying to fact check. Encourage people to remember that negative emotions are the mind's way of telling us to get off our butts and do something. My daddy always used to call it the idiot light in the car, which is not polite, I know, but I always remembered that. And that's the light that goes off when you've driven your car too long and you're almost out of gas, and that little gas light comes on. It says, hey, get gas. I wish I could say mine didn't come on very often, but it does.